Ari, I struggled with bracketology this week. Got a lot of Tennessee fans mad at me because I took the Vols out of the bracket, put them in the first four out. I didn't know what to do. I had to put Texas A&M in there after the LSU win. At least I felt like it. But then I couldn't really drop anybody else out, though I did consider dropping Ohio State out, but ended up just dropping them into the number 9 spot. It's hard because I know that we're going to get results that provide some clarity, but it feels like right now there's just a jumble of teams kind of in the top 13 or 14.
So when you say you couldn't take out A&M or leave A&M out, I think it's interesting because I struggle with the same thing myself when I was putting together my pieces. And, I think, and I'm sure you used to be an AP poll voter.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be too. And when you're a voter in the AP poll, I think a lot of times you're very reactionary to the thing that just happened. And A&M just had another convincing win on national television that everybody was watching. They looked amazing in the second half. And it's very easy to react to that in the moment, especially considering the fact we do a podcast right after that game's over and then we're doing these stories. But when you look at A&M and you say you could not leave them out at the current moment, was it because that just happened? Was it because you think their resume is better than Tennessee? And there's a third team that I think you should have considered too, which I actually took out that you didn't. And that was Clemson in terms of, two ACC teams being in the mix there. It's like, if you're looking at SEC teams, and Big Ten teams to drop out, like I think that the easiest path for me was to move Clemson out because I thought that Miami looked good enough to be considered the ACC favorite. I moved Miami back in.
But the thing is Clemson going to be out of the playoff if they go 11-2 and lose to Miami in the ACC championship game?
I don't know. I guess it depends on how everybody else does. But in terms of the projection moving forward, like I thought that Tennessee's win over Alabama was probably more convincing and more impressive than anything that Clemson has done all year. And moving Ohio State out was just a prediction I wasn't ready to make yet because that I think implies that they lose 2 more times, which is certainly
right. It implies they're going to lose to Penn State and Indiana, basically.
In Indiana.
Or Penn, I guess Michigan maybe, but probably not.
Yeah, and that's fine if you think that. I just don't think that yet. So
the A&M versus Tennessee thing, I think I would say that A&M's body of work is a little bit better right now. The LSU win, the way they beat Missouri, the fact that they beat Arkansas and Tennessee didn't, I think it gives them a little bit of an edge. But like if Alabama goes in and beats the crap out of LSU in a couple of weeks, I'm probably going to feel differently about that. I'll probably take Tennessee's win against Alabama and say, oh, okay. Now, the good news is like Tennessee plays Georgia, which will give us a lot of context because what if Tennessee goes in and beats Georgia? We're not even having a conversation about it. Like Tennessee's going to be way up there. The question will be like, are you putting them as the potential SEC champ at that point? So that's the part that we don't know yet. And there's still a lot to be played. The other factor with A&M is the head-to-head with Notre Dame. Like you can't put A&M ahead of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like you can leave Notre Dame out at the moment. Notre Dame beat the living crap out of Navy on Saturday. And that's a Navy team that had been really good. And I know there are some people who say that Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. That's a disqualifying loss. It doesn't matter. There's nothing you can say to those people. But the fact of the matter is, if Notre Dame is 11-1 with a head-to-head win against Texas A&M in College Station, the way Texas A&M is playing, Notre Dame's going to be in the playoff.
Absolutely. I don't think that Notre Dame is even a debate point at this point, right? Like if they lose again, I think that that's when they become a debate. But as long as they keep winning, like they're firmly in the field. Like it's not even a discussion on Selection Sunday. So, there are a lot of very interesting teams on the fringe here, Andy. And when you look at like the Clemson discussion, it's like, will Clemson get in if they're 11-2 and lose in the ACC championship? Well, I guess it just depends on, how does how does Iowa State look? What does Alabama do? Does Pitt, put themselves in a spot where they only have 1 loss at the end of the year if they're not playing in that ACC championship game? There's a lot really that's still out there to answer that question. But what I'm doing is it's like tight roping. And I'm sure you feel this way too, of like, how much do you weigh these individual teams' resumes right now, how much do you actually try to project what's going to happen on the field in the future? Because all this is just a different way of predicting who's going to win
Yeah.
games, right? Like that's
Well,
all that
and the
is.
thing is,
So,
like, where I put Ohio State, I don't know what the projection is for that. Probably that's a very close Indiana-Ohio State game in Ohio, but Ohio State loses to Penn State, but beats Indiana, and then maybe you'd have them flipped. You'd have them flipped, so Indiana has to go back to Columbus. But
yeah, I mean, you also could. Yeah, and I don't know how much time you're actually spending looking at the actual mathematical way this would work out. I haven't really done that yet. I think as we get closer, we'll get closer. But like that could be a loss to Michigan, and that was how it would work out.
yeah, exactly. And we're not even fathoming that right now, but we should, given the way Ohio State played yesterday. Like,
Yeah.
they're good enough to beat anybody, but they're also clunky enough, it seems like, to lose to some of the better teams on their schedule, or some of the
fun thing about this too,
more talented teams, I guess.
If you look at your bracket there, and it happened with Bubble Watch as well, Andy, you've got a lot of different teams that are represented from different conferences that are right there on the edge too.
Mm-hmm.
So like as you're trying to project, well, if a team doesn't win their conference, are they going to get in? You have to ask yourself, well, how is this other conference that doesn't have any crossover going to finish? You know, because it's like Iowa State and BYU, for instance, could both be undefeated in the Big 12 championship game. And then the loser of the Big 12 championship game might actually wind up being a more attractive take than the loser of the ACC championship, especially if there's a third team there at the ACC standings at the end of the year that didn't even play in that game, that didn't lose. So, like, to me, the reason why I moved Clemson, I don't want to belabor the point, is they haven't beaten anybody that is going to hold their resume up to scrutiny. They're one time playing a very good team. They lost by 100. And I don't think that Clemson's resume so far stacks up head to head with any of the teams that are either at the bottom of your bracket or on the fringe at the moment. And
I'm glad you said that. The good news for that is that Clemson is going to have to prove itself a little bit over here in the next few weeks. They've got Louisville coming next week. Then they go to Virginia Tech. Then they go to Pitt. Like, they survive that, they're in a better shape. But they also could very easily lose one of those games.
Yeah. And the fact that they still play Pitt probably helps clear up some of the waters. SMU is still there in the ACC.
Yeah, Pitt and SMU played this week, so we'll have an idea of which one of those came out on, we'll know which one of those came out on top.
But if SMU beats Pitt at home on Saturday, then they have a clear straight line path to potentially playing in the ACC title game without playing any of the two teams that are currently ahead of it. If Pitt beats SMU, then Clemson could beat Pitt, and then you could totally knock out the entire SEC outside of ACC outside of Clemson,
Miami and Clemson,
Miami.
Yeah. Yep.
So things could get murky, or things could get super cut and dry, and it all depends on what happens in this Pitt SMU game on Saturday. One other thing,
Miami's got the easiest path to 12-0 right now,
for sure. When you look at your bracket here, did you have? And I thought maybe you might get squirrely, because we were pretty high on Texas A&M's win last night. A&M's schedule is very manageable. Did you have any thought of switching 11-5 on this bracket?
No, because I didn't want to put A&M ahead of Notre Dame right now. Now,
because if you think that A&M is going to beat Texas, then that's what you do.
But if A&M is going to beat Texas, A&M has a chance to be number 1 or number 2. Because then they'd be in the SEC championship game, more than likely. And remember, they have not. They're the only team undefeated in SEC play right now.
Yep. And they'd probably play Georgia. The projection would have them losing to Georgia. Then that drops them right to 5, which is exactly where Texas is right now.
Yeah.
I gave some thought to it. I gave some thought to putting A&M at 5. If you wanted to make the move, and it's kind of like an olive branch, because I wasn't able to put A&M in my top 10. So I thought, hey, you know what I'll do? One of the content item will make them angry. I'll put them at 5 in the other one, and everyone's happy. Because it's true, A&M could not be a top 10 team right now in the meaningless polls, but actually wind up being the 5th seed in the tournament. And
if you look at A&M's schedule, I think between now and the Texas game, the most challenging game is at South Carolina, which is next week. Like, that's a tricky game to play coming off a big win. But if they get past that, they should be able to beat New Mexico State. They should be able to win at Auburn. And then they go into the Texas game probably feeling very comfortable that win or lose, they're in the playoff. But then they're playing for a spot in the SEC championship game. And we'll see what happens because it feels like both their schedules, Texas and Texas A&M's, are pretty manageable until they see each other.
Yeah, and I think that it's setting up for the first matchup between these two teams with both having 10 wins, first time since 1975. I read that's pretty electric, man, as the kids like to say. I'm excited. Andy, anything else that you had a hard time with?
One thing I had an easy time with, finally, the figuring out who number 12 was. Boise State solidified that. Navy losing helps that. Now, obviously, Army's still sitting there undefeated and trying to win the American, but we don't know how that's going to go. We've got Tulane that's undefeated in the American. John Summerall doing a great job in year one there, but Navy losing made it pretty easy, and Boise State beating UNLV made that easy. And it would have been basically whoever won the Boise State UNLV game was going to be put in that spot. And Boise State gutted that one out. Great game icing drive where Ashton Genty basically was just running into 9-man boxes and willing them to a win. So Boise State is definitely in the driver's seat there unless Army can beat Notre Dame. Like that's really where I think what it comes down to. UNLV is not done, though, because obviously they were very competitive against Boise State. There's a really good chance we see them play again on the blue for the Mountain West Championship. And if UNLV is 10-2 going into that game, I think there's still going to be a chance that UNLV can make the playoff coming out of that.
Yeah. I actually had a harder time finding group of 5 teams to fill in for the other spots to watch. And I still had to keep UNLV in there because if they win the Mountain West, they're
Liberty
still there.
Losing. Because you throw them out so there's nobody in Conference USA that you like. There's nobody in the MAC because the MAC standings are, the teams that have done the best in MAC play have a bunch of non-conference losses and don't have the wins to really buoy them.
All the MAC is the group of 5 Big 12. That's all that is.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And then. So, I think the Sun Belt doesn't have that one team. Like Louisiana is the best team in the Sun Belt so far this season, and they don't really wow you. So, I don't know. It's very interesting how this is all shaken out, but it does appear that it's going to be the American or the Mountain West champ. And unless Army is the one going through undefeated, it's probably the Mountain West champ.
Yeah, and I guess theoretically speaking, too, like Navy could win out the rest of their games, beat Army or whoever they play in the American, and play their way in if Boise loses. But it's
but UNLV has clear. 2 wins against Big 12 teams. Like,
UNLV, I think.
I'm saying if UNLV beats Boise State in the Mountain West Championship.
Yeah, I'm saying if UNLV wins the rest of their games, including a rematch against Boise State in Boise, I think they would be in.
Yeah. Now, I that part is so interesting to me because I don't know. How did you feel watching that game Friday night? Because that was the first group of 5 regular season game that to me felt like it had real playoff implications.
How I felt watching that game was UNLV is really, really good. And I wish that we could have seen what this team could have accomplished had they not had like back-breaking penalties against Syracuse and Boise in this game. Like, because they had the ball going down the field to go ahead in the fourth quarter with like 9 minutes left. And that personal foul that they had was such a weak call, caused them to punt, and then they never touched the ball again, which is what happens when the other team has Ashton Genty. But I actually thought, for how well and how complimentary we are for Boise, and that's deserving, that Boise was neck and neck with UNLV for 4 quarters.
Yeah.
And I think
UNLV it was a great game. Like, I want to see the rematch. I really am excited to see a rematch if it happens. So
and it is kind of unique that the game would be on a home field. Because usually you think conference championship games, you think
not in the group of 5, baby. They don't do neutral sites in the group of 5.
I thought that the MAC did Detroit.
The MAC does Ford Field. That's
but yeah. So I think it's starting to become clearer. And I think now we're getting into the point because Bracketology and Bubble Watch, all they were for the first 7-8 weeks of the season is just throwing shit against the wall. And now it's like the results of the games will help you pencil in exactly where teams belong because the picture is becoming clearer. And there weren't any crazy upsets on Saturday, but I thought it important day contextually to see, how things were falling into place. And you have the actual teams now. Like, it's just, we're getting to the point now where things are becoming clear.
Yes. And thank goodness for that. And we're getting to the point where lots of different games every Saturday will affect how this looks every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what you want. So we got a huge one next week with Ohio State and Penn State, two teams that I have in my bracket, two teams you have in your bracket. Maybe they're both in it when that game's over, maybe not. We'll find out.